Now you're gonna line it up.
So I'm Christopher Eck. I'm the state archaeologist for the NRCS in Kansas out of Salina. My formal archaeological training started at Penn State in central Pennsylvania. Then I went to Boston University for my master's degree. And right now I'm in the process of finishing up my PhD at the University of South Florida. So today we were essentially beginning the geophysical aspects of our survey of the site that's at the end of this field that we're standing in. At the end of this field, there is essentially what we're standing on now is the old Kickapoo Reservation, and that was active in the early 19th century, so from around 1830s to about mid-1850s. That reservation had a pretty decent population of transplanted Kickapoo native groups that came here from Illinois and Iowa regions of the country and some parts of Wisconsin. And they made their new home here in Kansas. Some of them stayed and some of them went to Mexico. So today we have the Kickapoo Reservation in the northeastern part of the state, as this reservation was ceded back to the United States in the mid-1850s, and then when Kansas was granted statehood, the Kickapoos moved further north. So we have the prairie band of Kickapoos here left in Kansas, and then there's a Mexican band of Kickapoos that fractured off from that initial movement of the Kickapoos into this region. But this site at the end of the field that we're doing geophysical survey for is specifically associated with a house area that would have been part of a Kickapoo domicile or house structure. And then there's also a set of at least 5 burials that are associated with this site as well. So far here we found a lot of creamware, so those historic type utilitarian wares and storage vessels, so a lot of broken sherds, and that's basically just pieces of broken pots, the ceramics that would have been used at that time period. Where we're standing right now is actually the border of the old town of Kickapoo. So this house would have been kind of on the fringes of that development. And so beyond that we find historic pieces of glass that tend to be green to clear. Usually the historic glass is much cloudier than modern glass if you hold it up to light. There's some metal artifacts and things like that back there. What's been discovered by the landowner here and by collectors in the area have been a metal brooch that would have been directly associated with one of the burials. And we have a huge selection of white and blue beads that would have been directly associated with jewelry associated with individuals that were interred on the site. So those types of things keep coming to the surface as the agricultural layers get closer and closer to those cultural layers over time. And so it tends to kind of erode out because they're sitting on top of a hill back there. So beyond the actual physical artifacts and materials that were there, there's also been about 9 human teeth recovered that are at the Kansas State Historical Society. And in that analysis, when I went to the state to do an analysis on those teeth, I basically came up with a minimum number of individuals based on the teeth that were present of about 5. So we know that during our geophysical survey here, we're looking for approximately at least 5 individual burials.
My name is Dr. Blair Schneider. So I'm an associate researcher and science outreach manager for the Kansas Geological Survey. My background is in near-surface geophysics, which is just using non-invasive subsurface imaging tools to look for urban features, humanitarian features, and environmental features. And I have gotten into the outreach side, working a lot with nonprofits, and yeah, that's my background. So I was contacted by Chris because they're actually looking for some Native American remains, and my dissertation research was actually looking specifically at that. Can we use geophysical tools to detect bone remains? And so I was really excited at this opportunity to come out and try this actually at a real site. And we'll be using 2 different tools. We're using ground penetrating radar and it looks kind of like a big lawnmower, and you can just kind of envision it as just taking x-rays of the ground as it goes along. And so we'll be using that, and we'll be using a magnetometer, which just looks at, are there like metallic or metal buried features underground. And we're hoping that between those two tools, we could tell if there are any actual shallow burials under the surface that landowners need to be aware of. So for me, the nice part is that I feel like I kind of get to go say, is there something there? And then I'm out of it, right? I don't do any digging. The whole point of my work is that it's non-invasive, and the whole point is that it doesn't disturb anything that's underneath the ground. So if I come across something and I'm noticing that, okay, there's a pattern of targets that appear to be facing east to west, and they appear to be about 6 feet long, I think we potentially have some buried graves here. I give that to Chris, I tell him where they are, and then I'm done. The whatever state or federal regulations go in play, the archaeologists take it from there. Oh man, for me, a lot of it is about giving back. I am really passionate, so my minor, it was historical archaeology. I did my major in geology, and I really just want to be able to give back to tribal communities in particular. This is an issue, right? We don't always know where their burials are. We encounter them, and then they might have to get repatriated, they might get moved around. In general, I just want them to be respected, to remain where they are, and just give an opportunity to maybe give some of that history back to communities who have lost it. That's really what I'm passionate about. I've also worked with police departments, because again, looking for cold cases or looking for missing persons, I just want to give back and provide some closure for people who need it. So we have two unique sites here, right? Because one's within this wooded area where we're looking for a possible foundation, but then you've got the possible graves, which are in a pasture field. So the pasture is amazing, right? As long as they've cut down that corn, I have no obstacles, it's easy. But in the wooded areas, my equipment is long and clunky, or I'm trying to get over rocks and sticks over the ground that can kind of mess up the data. But otherwise, it's just a matter of what's in my way and what's not. Yeah, and so what happens here is we collect the data here, and then I'll actually take it back and I can run it through a lot of filters and just additional processing steps to clean it up and help me interpret it as best as possible. But I always like to tell people, I might say, okay, I've hit a target, I've hit a diffraction, but that doesn't mean I can tell you what it is. So we could go out and we could hit a target that looks like a potential burial, dig it up, and it's a rock. And I can't tell you otherwise what it's going to be. The radar can just tell you that there's a target there, but that's why I'll run secondary information. So if I run the magnetometer and it picks up the same target, okay, well I know that whatever's buried there is somehow metallic, somehow magnetic. There's other equipment like electrical resistivity tools. We can run that in conjunction with the radar, so I can say, okay, here's a target and it's really conductive. So it could be this. So we can use multiple geophysical tools to try and address some of those unknowns, because I think the unknown is essentially a barrier with the geophysics. You can find something, but you don't know what it is. So my next steps will be starting with the pasture fields. And since I know I'm looking for graves, there are things that I think about, right? So first and foremost, I want to start with radar. Radar is the most advanced piece of equipment that I have. And so might as well use it first. I love my radar because it can give me multiple depth intervals to look at. And there's some things I know about burials, right? It sounds like potentially they could be shallow. So I know what kind of frequencies to use. And it also sounds like typically graves are oriented east-west. So I know to run my surveys in a particular direction. So first and foremost, I'll come out, I'll collect the radar data, I'll look at that, but then secondary to that afterwards, I'll also come out and run the mag over it, again, just to kind of say, hey, if I pick up on any hits, are they magnetic? I have to say, it is super amazing when you have super awesome landowners like we have here. They give us so much information that we didn't have beforehand, and it really, really helps guide me. They can give me information. I found like a deep reflector when I was looking at the radar now, and I'm like, man, what is this? And I can look at them and say, hey, do you know how deep the water table is? Do you know if we're close to bedrock? And they can give me some information that kind of helps answer those uncertainties that I don't always have. So ultimately, I really just love having such great landowners to work with. And Chris. Chris has been absolutely vital in speeding up the process because he tells me exactly where he thinks something is, what they recorded, and where to go.
Bob Phillips. We're in Kickapoo Township, or Kickapoo area in Leavenworth, Kansas. I grew up here in Leavenworth, and we're standing right next door to my mother's family farm. And I actually went to law school at Washburn in Kansas, and was an attorney, and actually ended up in Washington, D.C. area as a CEO, and then retired. And then I'm back here bought a little farm next door to the family farm. Well, having grown up around farming and all my life, I've enjoyed the farm and rural lifestyle. And when we bought the farm, we had the USDA take a look at the soil. There were some areas the folks that are farming it for us wanted to maybe till, and discovered that we had some wetland on the property. And when you do that, you have an opportunity to help with soil conservation practices and practices that would help wildlife and things like that. And the USDA suggested to me that the NRCS part of USDA suggested maybe we want to rehabilitate or establish the wetland and do some work with it. So I've been working with them to try to improve it and use it. Back when my mom's great-great-grandfather bought the farm, and they moved here in the mid-1800s, and then in the 1920s, I guess, when they were digging a well, they discovered an Indian burial site there. And of course, we were aware that this has been a Kickapoo Indian reservation, large part of this land. And of course, the Catholic Church up here is the first one in Kansas, so it's a very historic area, being next to Fort Leavenworth. And for years and years, my ancestors have found Indian artifacts when they're plowing the fields or working the ground. And we've just always had a love for that and kind of studied it. And it's kind of interesting now that we're doing this project, we're finding more of Indian relics. Well, one of the goals is this wetland area, working with the USDA and NRCS, is got about 15 acres down here that's really not designed for farming now because of the wetland. And we want to be able to bring back native grasses and native trees and species. And we want to use the wetland to attract wildlife, particularly waterfowl and those kind of things, and to improve the habitat down there for animals. So my kids, I hope they'll, when they inherit this, I hope that they'll have an appreciation for that. I'm sure they will. And to keep it so that it's very natural, it supports the wildlife and it enhances the conservation qualities with the land and the soil and the horticulture. First of all, I'd say I was very impressed with USDA and NRCS and the people that they brought to bear on the project. Very professional, got Kansas University involved, and it's just really exciting to watch them work and to be a part of that.